All right, welcome to our fourth webinar. This is an overview on natural gut relief. We're going to begin with talking about root cause treatment and what exactly does that mean. So, root cause treatment is how far can you retrace a problem? How far can you trace a problem backwards? If you can't trace it any further back, then you've ended up at the root. It kind of makes sense. It's implied by the name. But I think it's overlooked quite a bit. In this example, we're going to talk about bloating. So somebody that has bloating may reduce foods that exacerbate their bloating. They may also take supplements that help improve their bloating, but they continue to have bloating and they continue to have to do those things. And that means they haven't likely resolved one of these root issues that could be contributing to their gut-related symptom. So we'll walk through this example from a big picture, and then we'll dial in closer to more specific examples and more specific dysfunctions, drivers, and corrections. Okay. Symptom, bloating. What's causing the bloating? In this particular example, some sort of dysfunction. There are three dysfunctions. We'll talk about all three. Decreased motility. That is constipation. So things aren't moving along the tract as fast as they should, and so they have more time to ferment. And so now when you eat those short-chain carbohydrates or different types of foods, and they will more readily ferment if they're sitting there in the gut not moving like they should, and it'll cause bloating. So this particular case, while you could remove what's causing the bloating in the sense that you can reduce FODMAPs or foods that would cause that issue, you've not gotten rid of the dysfunction that's led to the issue to begin with. Well, what's driving the dysfunction? Well, that's the drivers of the dysfunction, which we'll talk about. In this particular case, this person's producing an excessive amount of stress hormones, which is slowing gut motility, which is causing the bloating. Well, what causes excessive stress hormone production? Well, in this particular example, this is a real life example. It actually happens all the time. Low blood sugar. This person's waking up between 1 and 3, can't fall back asleep. They're getting hangry, they're snacking throughout the day, and they definitely skip breakfast or they eat a very light breakfast. And their blood sugar dips, stress hormones come up, motility decreases, and you get into a pattern of this, and you get stuck with this bloating issue. This person also has anxiety. This person has a lot of these other symptoms that maybe seem unrelated to the gut, but are tied directly together. And if you were to get rid of the root issue, in this case the blood sugar, because you can't trace that any further back, it's something that you were delivering to your body, and it's outside of the potential dysfunctions that can happen within the body. So it's a lifestyle thing that you can change that can't be traced any further back. Stabilizing blood sugar. Okay, so we're going to talk about all of the different examples, and this will cover pretty much everything. Here are the examples of symptoms. So you see at the bottom, we've got in blue all of the ones we're not talking about yet, and in yellow, the one we're primarily talking about now, symptoms. This is the most easy of all of them. Bloating, diarrhea, constipation, gas, indigestion, reflux, and nausea are common symptoms that there is some gut-related issue. Those are gut symptoms that indicate some gut dysfunction. When you have some gut dysfunction, it indicates some driver, and some driver indicates some correction. See how that works? So that one's pretty easy. When we talk about dysfunctions, there are three, like we said: too much or too little motility, diarrhea, constipation. We have an imbalance of good and bad bacteria, either too much of the bad or not enough of the good, typically too much of a bad overgrowth, bacteria or fungal usually. Or you have trouble breaking down food, causing some sort of digestive symptom. Okay, some sort of dysfunction breaking food down. What drives dysfunction? If you're following along so far, you're doing pretty good. So we're going to slow down a little bit to talk about this, because this is kind of an important bridge. So we've got this dysfunction, either too much or too little movement. What regulates that? Well, it's tightly regulated by cytokine production, neurotransmitters, T cells, and the autonomic system. So what impacts all of those things? In short, two broad categories: stress and inflammation. The same is for breaking food down. producing enough stomach acid. Bile problems. If you are in the middle of the Sahara and you see a lion, you are not going to be concerned, your body's not going to be concerned with breaking that sweet potato you just ate down. It's going to be more concerned with getting away from that lion or getting ready to fight that lion. And it's directing energy more towards the sympathetic side and less towards the parasympathetic rest and digest side. So there's a really good book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it was based off the fact that you don't see ulcers in the animal kingdom outside of the human race. Reason being is that we live in chronic stress. The zebra sees the lion, stress hormones come up, it runs away, stress hormones come down, and they don't live in the chronic stress situation. Chronic stress leads to the ulceration in the stomach. So, reducing stress and reducing inflammation, primary drivers of motility issues and trouble with digestion in general. The weird one, or the odd man out, is the dysbiosis, because the imbalance in the gut is as far as it goes. You need to correct the imbalance. It is the dysfunction, it is the driver, and it is the correction, which is why most people will focus so heavily on that. But what they fail to neglect is that why the dysbiosis persists is because of those other two things and not addressing them properly. But still important to address. If you have mold on the wall, you need to clean the mold off the walls. Use some sort of antimicrobial. I am suggesting, Malia will talk about each one of these three, stress, inflammation, and dysbiosis, in a little more detail in the correction section, which is coming up. All right, here are the three. Stress can drive inflammation. Inflammation can cause stress. And dysbiosis, of course, creates damage in the gut and can create an inflammatory response as a result of that. There are three major categories and drivers of stress hormone production. The one everyone's familiar with is emotional. If I get home from work and I didn't do the dishes and I get in trouble for it, I'm going to hear about it. I'm going to get emotionally stressed. If my kid was getting bullied at work or at school, then I'm going to have a stress hormone response to that. Those are things outside of my control and are very hard. You really just have to learn to deal with those things, and that's what counseling's for, and therapy and all of that stuff. So those are important to address, but they're almost impossible to work on addressing if you have the metabolic issues as well in the chemical side. So blood sugar and inflammation. Inflammation coming up again, inflammation driving stress hormones. Very important to address all of it. Inflammation can be traced further back, blood sugar cannot, so blood sugar is a root issue. So we need to address the blood sugar issue, which we'll talk about in either the next slide or the one after. Whether you have high or low, we need to work on that. That is a root issue that needs to be addressed and could be directly related to your gut-related issue. Okay, physical side of things, that's pain. You stub your toe, you get a cortisol response, you get a pain response, you get a stress hormone response. Chronic pain will cause chronic stress hormones and will lead to chronic pain patterns. Again, those are chronic pain loops, and you need to, in order to break them, working on the metabolic thing is important too. People have fibromyalgia very commonly have some sort of dysbiosis, and even more commonly an antifungal or a fungal issue, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well when we get into more detail with dysbiosis. There are two things primarily that will drive an inflammatory issue: pathogens and damage to tissues. So pathogens, most people know that your immune system is going to react to some sort of infection, whether that's fungus, bacteria, virus, etc., or some sort of tissue damage. I just rolled my ankle and I get an inflammatory response. Or in the gut, since we're talking about gut-related issues, you have leaky gut, which maybe you've heard of, where the gut lining starts to become broken down, allowing foods to come into the bloodstream and then you become sensitive to them, and then later develop into autoimmune issues, like we're going to be talking about in probably number 5 webinar. So a chronically inflamed hollow organ will lead to a Th2, Th17 response driving an autoimmune issue. And I usually see this exacerbating, but not as a primary. So still important to address a lot of autoimmune issues. Most people start with dysbiosis because of that very reason. Okay, The goal of supplementation is to temporarily assist in removing a nutrient drain. So my use of supplements is to either try and aid in the reduction of an associated symptom like anxiety with magnesium, zinc, B6, ashwagandha, something like that. And while that's helping temporarily while we're correcting root issues, as long as we're correcting root issues, then they can still feel better while we're working on those issues. So that once you're done with those, you're done with them and you don't have to keep using them. You know, if the three pieces of the stress hormone picture is, you know, chemical and physical, and you've addressed them fully, and you have a emotional issue that is going to persist, then maybe you do need to stay on ashwagandha for a little while and help your body respond and adapt to that stress. But that's few and far between from at least what I see in the office. I do have affiliate links at the bottom, which you can look at. They can kind of direct you in some good brands. I use a full script account so that we can put together protocols, but I do get a kickback on that. The Amazon links, I don't get any kickback. They're just good brands. So the exception of the temporarily assisting the removal of nutrient drains and associated symptoms is the antimicrobial herbs, the broad spectrum antimicrobial herbs like Malia that will clean the mold off the walls. So this is kind of a refresher with removing stress hormones, the low blood sugar, and the inflammation. Low blood sugar you can't trace any further back, so that is primary. But talking about adaptogens like ashwagandha, I mentioned a little bit earlier. Nice thing about ashwagandha is that whether you're producing too many stress hormones, like before you go to bed and you can't fall asleep and you're wired, or you're producing stress hormones in the middle of the night because of a blood sugar issue, adaptogens help reduce that production. But in the morning, it was a low battery signal there. But in the morning, if you're not producing enough stress hormones, it could lead to fatigue. So the adaptogens will actually increase stress hormone production to adapt to that. So they're pretty nice to have. They're not going to overly do anything. They should just bring you closer to homeostasis. If you're not far enough away from homeostasis, you're not going to notice any difference taking ashwagandha. People talk about it in males increasing testosterone. Well, the reason being is because of the way it adapts to with the stress hormone response. And, you know, if you're producing excessive cortisol, you're not going to be producing testosterone. Your body's not going to be concerned with reproducing. It's going to be concerned with, getting away from whatever it is. Okay, time to essentially the first lifestyle change that you need to make for blood sugar issues. If it's low, fasting glucose will be less than 85. Less than 65 is a lab low or a pathologic low, but functional low is 85. And so you will have functional level symptoms, stress hormone response, nonetheless, at 85 or lower. And it does vary between people. But anyways, having these symptoms is even a better indication. Waking up between 1 and 3, inability to fall asleep, getting hangry, avoiding breakfast or eating a light meal for breakfast because you're too nauseous. Basically, you have all these stress hormones and you don't feel like eating. These people tend to have anxiety, and they tend to be either normal weight or underweight. You can see it in athletes. With athletes, you want to make sure that they're not overtraining or doing any excessive exercise. So on the low blood sugar side, you want to avoid excessive exercise. On the high blood sugar, we'll talk about a little bit, you actually want to push exercise. So we want to eat 3 balanced meals, no fasting for this particular demographic of people, this subset. 5 hours apart, no snacking. So if you eat lunch and you notice that you're still hungry, then you need to do better the previous meal. So you need to focus on eating good protein, good fat, and eating at least 100 grams of protein is a good rule of thumb. Most people are going to have a lot of trouble doing that, but you're going to feel a lot better once you do it. So anchor your meals in fats and protein. Carbs are okay, but just don't eat them by themselves. Like, just don't have a bowl of oatmeal because your blood sugar will come up like it should, but it'll plummet, and then stress hormones come up. And you don't want to be dependent on stress hormones to bring your blood sugar up. You want to be dependent on that bacon and eggs, or the macro cocoa, which is just in hot water, melting down 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 to 3 tablespoons of butter, which is your fat, and then taking a frother and mixing that evenly, and then adding a chocolate flavored whey protein powder, 1 to 2 scoops to get the protein, and you got your fat and your protein, and you can add some fruit to it if you want. I don't put it in there. I just on the side, like a little piece of fruit or something. Me personally, I do half a stick of butter, which is 4 tablespoons, and I do 2 scoops of the protein powder, which will be linked below. On the high blood sugar side, you're going to see on labs over 100. If you have this, you've probably been talked to. This is one of the blood markers they like to actually talk to you about. If it's over, you're going to see diabetic. You're going to get that mark. Lethargic after meals, tend to be a little bit more overweight. As far as mood issues go, you see more depression, but you can see depression, anxiety on different spectrums no matter what. But if you're going to do a poll, I probably see more depression on that side, more anxiety on the other. Definitely no sugar for this person. If you have a bunch of people waiting in line to get inside your house, but your house is already full of people, you're not going to let any of those people in, so that you're going to build up those people outside. It's when your blood glucose gets up. You got 100 people out there. Now you got 120 people out there. Now you got 150 people out there. Well, you need to empty the house full of people so that 150 can be 140, 130, and start to lower. So in order to lower that number, you can either reduce the number of people coming in, which would be cutting sugar. And then alternatively, you can exercise. Exercise is what's going to squeeze that cell and push the people out the back door so that you can allow for more people in. It reduces the amount of people outside. Hopefully that makes sense. Intermittent fasting is something that's good because the reason why it helps improve insulin sensitivity is that you just stop bringing people to your door. So you're fasting. Eating in a smaller window will actually be better for people that have high blood sugar issues. So the polar opposite issues. So the polar opposite corrections. 100 grams of protein, though, for no matter who you are. So as far as herbs go, low blood sugar side, you're going to focus on artichoke extract, which is essentially glucuronic acid. People who have low blood sugar issues, sorry about the cats. People who have low blood sugar issues are more likely to have a stress hormone issue. And in order to break down stress hormones, you need glucuronic acid, you need sulfation or cysteine, basically, or you need glutathione conjugation. And of those three, you're going to be more likely at a disadvantage with glucuronidation if you have a blood sugar issue. So artichoke is very helpful with those people. As far as the high blood sugar stuff, a very common nutrient that I put people on is berberine, but chromium lipoic acid also help to improve insulin sensitivity. The advantage to berberine is that it reduces interleukin-6, which is a chronic inflammatory cytokine. So it's anti-inflammatory. Magnesium, zinc, B6 not only help balance blood sugar because it helps turn glucose into glycogen and glycogen into glucose. So whether you're pushing or pulling, they're used a lot. The most common nutrients you're going to see across the board in biochemistry. Also very common deficiencies because of that. Okay, reducing inflammation. In order to reduce inflammation, we're going to reduce triggers, we're going to reduce accelerators, and we're going to aid in the clearance of inflammation. So reduce triggers, I'm just going to pick 3 of the most common. You can choose to go on an anti-inflammatory diet, but these are the 3 that I see most common, make the biggest impact: gluten, dairy, and sugar. Cut those out, you're going to do yourself a big favor, and you're probably going to see a pretty big impact. Also, you want to reduce inflammatory accelerators. Those are stress hormones, which we've talked about with the blood sugar stuff's going to help. Insulin, which we talked about with the blood sugar stuff, which is going to help. So these things are actually going to reduce the rate of inflammation. Even there's a demand for it, it's actually going to reduce the rate of production of inflammation. Excessive NSAID production. Nice thing about NSAIDs, aspirin, ibuprofen, is they block prostaglandin production, which helps with acute inflammatory issues, but actually will shunt towards leukotrienes, which is actually a chronic inflammatory issue or marker. So reducing the accelerators, reducing things that facilitate those pathways, and next you can work on aiding the clearance of it. So that's eating enough good omega-3s so that your body can use magnesium, zinc, B6, so that it can make enough fish oil. That's how your body makes fish oil, magnesium, zinc, B6. So if you have a lot of inflammation, you have instability in your blood sugar, you can run down on magnesium, zinc, B6, which are the primary nutrients in order to make serotonin, GABA, dopamine, all those neurotransmitters. And so people that have anxiety and depression many times will have these other metabolic issues going on that have been exacerbated because of these metabolic problems. So again, root cause issues, working on those nutrient drains, things that are running you down on nutrients instead of just taking those nutrients. You can consider turmeric or resveratrol. If I'm going to pick one, I'm going to pick turmeric. Those basically help inhibit those interleukins so that you're not producing as much inflammation. Similar to berberine, actually. All right, so talking about dysbiosis, we're going to break them down on the next slide, and fungal and bacterial issues, we're going to talk about them briefly, but most commonly there is an overgrowth, so you need to take an antimicrobial herb like Malia. We're just going to use Malia. There are at least 15 different herbs that we use in the office, but Malia is a good one. It's broad spectrum, meaning it handles lots of different types of infections and overgrowths, and in addition to that, you need to understand that dysbiosis is a little inflammatory factor, or a diet factory. So no matter how good your diet is, you're going to be producing inflammation. So I see this a lot in autoimmune people. People will come in, they've done everything to correct their diet, but they still have gut infections. It's like, why aren't they getting over this? Well, they haven't taken the time to wipe it clean, or they haven't addressed some of these root cause issues that are further perpetuating an inflammatory or a stress hormone issue. There's a valve that separates the small and the large intestine that maintains the microbes in the large intestine. But if you lose tone in that valve, you start to get an overgrowth in the small intestine. And that's what causes less tone in that valve? Well, inflammation and stress hormones will both decrease tone in that valve, causing an overgrowth. So it may have been the root issue that led to the dysbiosis, but still needs to be clean. You still need to take care of that overgrowth while it's there. Okay. So, repairing the damage, you might hear about glutamine a lot. The gut lining is made of glutamine, so that's why people take it. It also helps with, IgA issues. But in general, as long as people are eating enough protein, I don't even really do it a whole lot. In some cases, I will, but those are few and far between, to be honest. In addition to the sugar, dairy, gluten that we talked about, you can add yeast and fermented foods. It could be aggravating if you don't really know what kind of overgrowth that you might have. Honestly, like if you have symptoms when you eat it, you shouldn't be eating it, and that's a pretty good indication. There are some things that bother people that you don't even know, and that's why if you just pick these things, you're going to be tackling a lot of the potential issues. So briefly, we'll talk about SIBO. You could go on for a long time talking about SIBO and these specific infections, but if you just do these general things, you're going to tackle these things. So low FODMAP diets are a collection of short-chain carbohydrates that readily ferment in the gut because they're poorly absorbed to begin with. And so when you have all these other things going on, they're going to cause gas and bloating, and you're going to have symptoms. And this is a very common diet that you see people who have IBS get relief with because they're getting rid of the trigger foods, but they're still not correcting the issue. And so they have to be on a low FODMAP diet forever. And they do stay on it forever. But there are a lot of healthy foods on that high FODMAP side that they're avoiding, like avocados on that side. Like I'm not avoiding avocado. I'm going to, maybe for a short while, and then you're going to add it back in once you've corrected the overgrowth. Okay. Other than, a big thing really quick with SIBO is that they do get the bloating and the gas right after carbohydrates. So like if you're eating any of these foods on the red side and you're getting bloating, that's number one. It's probably SIBO, and you need to go on this low FODMAP diet. There's a bunch of variations of it, but this is pretty close is what I use. This is what I've kind of put together from different research, but either way, you're going to be taking Malia. Malia works for the fungal or the bacterial issues. If it's a fungal issue, which I see a lot more with chronic pain patients, fibromyalgia patients, chronic anything patients, when you have a fungal issue, you have these little chemical factories where they produce aldehydes, and both will drive an ammonium toxicity problem, but they can cause a lot of funky symptoms. And so a lot of my more difficult patients end up being fungal overgrowths. So, and people feel a lot better once they start clearing this stuff. So as far as the diet goes, no sugar, no cheese, no yeast, no fermented foods, no alcohol, and I allow fresh fruit. I've never had any, there's always an exception to the rule. Most of the time, totally fine taking fruit in. Occasionally, you're going to have to cut the fruit out too. But they should be able to clear it, a fungal issue in 6 to 8 weeks, assuming that there's not all these other underlying issues that you've not yet corrected. Like if something's perpetuating, it's because you're not fixing something that you should be. All right, as a summary, you're reducing stress hormones and inflammation by correcting the blood sugar issues, by removing triggers, accelerators, and supporting the body in its ability to reduce inflammation, reduce stress hormones, and kind of clean up the mess that you've made with the antimicrobial herbs. And here's a summary sheet of it as far as lifestyle things, what to eat, because what not to eat, and then what to make sure you eat enough of, because if you cut too much food out and then you're not eating enough food, you're going to cause a low blood sugar issue and you're going to feel worse. Like if you feel worse, then you've screwed up. Really focus on that 100 grams of protein, separate them evenly, 33 grams in each meal if you can. Really, really focus in on breakfast if you're in the low blood sugar side. Honestly, like if you don't know, just do the 3 meals, because it's safer to do that and not go high sugar or anything. And you'll tackle both issues if you just do that. So again, if you have any questions, you can email me at doc@drtoddanderson.com, right on this website. Just below this video, you should see a link to sign up for a 20-minute discovery call. It's completely free. You can talk to me about whatever you want to talk about. That time is yours, and it's, like I said, it's free. If you want to schedule anything, I'm in the Elk River, Minnesota area, and you can still talk to me on that 20-minute call. We can schedule something afterwards, or you can send me an email or give us a call and schedule right away. So if I don't talk to you, then maybe I'll see you in the next one, and I think it'll probably be autoimmune. Thanks.